Hey, this is Sandy.
And Randy.
And we're here on AT Corner.
Being an athlete trainer comes with ups and downs, and we're here to showcase it all.
Join us as we share our world in sports medicine.
Welcome back to another episode of AT Corner. For this week's episode, we have another Rehab Concepts education episode, and today we'll be talking about supersetting.
It's been a while since we've had a rehab concept, so I'm super excited to dive into this. And I feel like supersetting is probably something that athletic trainers do, but not something that we actively think about.
I would say consciously do.
Right.
When I first think of like supersetting, I feel like it's like my first thought is like, this is a really cool late stage rehab kind of concept. I mean, I guess you could probably do it whenever, but that's just what comes to mind for me.
That's actually really funny that you say that, because I feel like I do it a lot earlier than late phase.
You know what would be funny is, or what would be cool is if, because I didn't see anything like this, if they actually had more kind of supersetting for rehab.
Mm-hmm.
That'd be actually pretty cool to see.
So anyway, this is a CEU episode. So what that means is if you are interested in claiming this as Category A CEUs, scroll down to the show notes. We have a link for you to go to our partners website. Thank you so much to Clinically Pressed and Athletic Training Chat for partnering with us and bringing you this episode for free as it comes out. If this is a little bit of a later episode, it will be still affordably priced for you through that same link. You just have to do the quiz and the course evaluation, and then you can claim those CEUs. It will generate a certificate for you. So scroll down to the show notes if you're interested in that. If you are interested in the references for this episode, go down to the show notes as well. Randy will have those up for you. And why don't we talk about what the objectives are for this?
Yeah, so we're going to describe what supersetting is and kind of what the goal of using this kind of technique is. Then we're going to discuss the physiological response to supersetting, and then we're going to discuss the applications of supersetting as it relates to rehab. So if you're wondering, what is supersetting?
We just kind of jumped in and kept talking.
Then you have come to the right place. Basically, it's a programming style designed to create a lifting session that is time efficient. And what it basically consists of is performing 2 or more exercises, which I didn't know the or more part. I always kind of knew it as just like 2. But
yeah, honestly, I kind of picture 2.
Yeah.
Like when I'm doing rehab, but yeah, I mean, I guess you could do more than 2.
I would say technically you can. There actually was one study that did do what's kind of termed tri-setting, which is basically supersetting with 3 exercises. But essentially, these exercises are done in succession with minimal to no rest, right? So you're basically jumping from one exercise to the next with really no rest period in between those. Mm-hmm. So there are 3 different types, which again, I didn't know that either. I kind of only knew the first one, which is agonist and antagonist.
Mm-hmm. That's what I think of.
Yeah. So this is basically you're exercising the agonist muscle, and then you jump to a set of the antagonist muscle. So for an example, this would be like a bicep curl, and then you start doing like tricep extensions. The next type is called alternate peripheral, which is basically do an upper extremity exercise and then do a lower extremity exercise. Yeah. I didn't know that.
Yeah, I wouldn't have thought of that either.
And
other than like, I feel like here's the thing. I feel like maybe some of us have been doing this on accident because like you do an upper extremity exercise and you're like, oh, well, you don't need to rest before you go into a lower extremity.
Exactly.
You know?
Yeah.
Actually, really fast before we move on for the agonist antagonist, just a short plug for neurokinetic therapy. If you guys have not heard of it, it's basically I don't even know how to explain it. It's like a technique.
It's like a different take on manual muscle testing
to help with your evaluation, with manual muscle testing, that really dives into agonist-antagonist relationships.
Yeah.
So if you are more interested in that and want to dive a little bit deeper in the agonist-antagonist, neurokinetic therapy would be a really great place to start.
Yeah, for sure. I wish there was more research on that. Because that'd be cool to read. And then the final type of supersetting is biomechanically similar. So this is basically the same muscle or action, with just kind of maybe like a slight difference in the type of exercise. So this is like possibly doing like bench press and then going into like flies, or doing like a barbell bench and then jumping to a dumbbell bench. Right. So it's a slight variation, but you're basically doing the same motion.
Oh, okay.
So again, the goal of supersetting is, hey, we're trying to make a time-efficient way of lifting. So does it actually do that? And the evidence does say it is actually very good at doing that.
Oh, that's awesome.
Yes. So when it's compared to traditional lifting, so this is like completing one set of exercises and then resting, and then you progress to the next, and then resting in between those sets. So like doing your squat, one set, rest, squat, one set, rest, and then squat, and then move on. It's actually like around 60% faster than doing traditional lifting. So one of the studies that looked at it was like a traditional lift lasted about an hour. Supersetting cut it down to 35 minutes.
That's kind of cool.
Yeah. So you actually do get a really good workout out of this. And what's crazy is a lot of those studies also found that the perceived exertion, supersetting was harder than traditional traditional lifting.
I mean, it makes sense. You're kind of being in that more fatigued state.
Yeah.
Not allowing your body to be fully rest, which I think is so beneficial when you think of like sport. You don't always have like that 1 minute rest or like that 2 minute.
Yeah, that's true. I didn't think of it that way, but that's very true. Like you don't really have a lot of time to rest.
Right. I mean, depends on the sport.
Yeah.
Also, and I keep going back to this, but I feel like this is also something that maybe we can be doing more intentionally, because I feel like this is something that happens anyway. Like, you know how many times you write a rehab plan for an athlete and you kind of just let them go, and they've been coming in and doing their own thing, and like you didn't tell them how much to rest in between. Like they might just be doing rest or not be doing rest.
I would say, or even if you did, that probably just more.
Jump into the next thing.
That, or took too long a rest because they started talking to somebody.
Right. I think that the last time that we sat down and timed the rest in between someone's sets was BFR.
Probably. Because there's a lot. I feel like there is a lot more to that. With the machine, and because the machine has programmed rest, right?
You just have to do the 30 and then 30-second rest, and then 15, and then 30-second rest, and then 15.
Yeah. So you're right. Can't even think of a time last time I actually sat there and be like, okay, we're resting for 30 seconds. Timer on.
Right.
So now that we know it actually at least achieves its goal of being a time efficient kind of programming style, now it's time to understand why is it different? Is it the same? What is it exactly doing? All right. And it really kind of depends on the type that you use. So if you're kind of using the more biomechanically similar method, right, you're choosing a method that's going to be more fatiguing. All right, so you're going to try and choose something that's going to probably go towards more the endurance side of it. I mean, I wouldn't say necessarily it's an endurance exercise. It's kind of like that strength endurance kind of idea. But compared to like agonist, antagonist, like this is the more kind of fatiguing method. I mean, that agonist, antagonist would still be fatiguing, but
I mean, it makes sense. You're just targeting the same muscle.
And this is kind of seen by the evidence that shows that throughout the lift, as you go through the sets, you see a lower velocity of the lift. Power also starts to decrease. So you can see they're starting to get fatigued. Also, there are increases in blood lactate levels, right, which can also lead to fatigue if it's from the increased acidity from the lactate. And then it can also possibly lead to more damage, right? Because the acidic environment cells don't really like that and then start to also become damaged as well. And then again, you can also see increases in creatine kinase, which is usually used as a sign for DOMS. So it's kind of a sign of, hey, you're increasing more damage. You're going to get some more soreness out of this. But most athletes really just, and maybe most clinicians kind of care about the, okay, well, do we get strength out of it? Right. And what I found to be very interesting was the results really tended to be very similar to traditional lifting.
Oh, that's really interesting.
Yeah. Like the strength gains were actually very similar.
So it takes less time to build the same amount of strength.
Yes.
Okay. And probably more quote unquote painful because you have to work through a little bit more fatigue.
Yeah, for sure. Some results have shown like in some categories that there's like a slight non-statistical increase compared to traditional as well. But again, technically non-statistical, but hey, something to note. I think it's very interesting. So yes, it does kind of lend more to that efficiency part. Next, kind of looking at power. And honestly, the results are the same as strength, right? It tends to be very similar to traditional lifting. But what I thought was interesting is the studies that kind of looked at this, or like anything that I saw, didn't really look at power-specific exercise. All right, so they still compare just traditional lifting, which is more kind of strength-based. They didn't look at like, compare it to a plyometric program or like, actual kind of power lifts. Where the programming is specifically powered for power.
I feel like when I think of supersetting, I would not pair this with power.
And neither would I.
I feel like, so for example, one of the ones that I do is a single leg RDL with a kickstand with a dumbbell or a kettlebell.
Yeah.
And so I do that, and then I move into a split squat.
Yeah.
And that's like very standard. You can watch their form. Like I feel with power, it's like I worry about their form with fatigue.
Yeah.
Which, I mean, there's also the argument that you should be working kind of through fatigue to make sure that they are able to get there. But I don't know. I feel like you kind of have to make a judgment call on that one, and power is not really one that
that's why I think if you looked at it probably to power-specific programming, it probably wouldn't hold up, because this is just compared to traditional lifts.
Right.
So I agree. And then next is now kind of looking at hypertrophy. And I feel like this one's very interesting. I didn't really see anything that really labeled results for hypertrophy, so actually looking at change in the muscle size. So with hypertrophy, the one thing that is really difficult for us to kind of do with hypertrophy, especially if like the athlete's fairly healthy. I mean, obviously, if we're rehabbing them, they're slightly injured, right? But like in general, right, they're kind of in a healthy state. It's not like post-op slightly different. Don't
have huge obvious deficits.
Yeah. But for hypertrophy, you tend to need really high loads at very high intensities, right? Like I think technically the hypertrophy window is like 8 to 12 reps at like, I think it's over 80% 1 rep max on an exercise. So it's a very intense thing. And supersetting, like some of the studies didn't really go that far, like didn't use that kind of intensity. But it is interesting because some superset studies actually showed you lifted more total load compared to traditional lifting.
Interesting.
So theoretically, there could be the avenue for that. But then also others showed that it was actually less load compared to traditional lifting.
So what you're saying is it depends.
I would say it depends. It's
a very athletic training thing to do.
Yeah, I think it's really dependent on the type of kind of superset program you do. Like if you're doing the biomechanically similar, well, you're probably not going to get through as much because you're going to fatigue, right? Whereas maybe agonist, antagonist, right? You might be able to get through more because the muscles aren't necessarily fatiguing at a faster rate. Also, there is some literature that has shown maybe a slight increase in testosterone after a superset. This was really small. And the study that kind of looked at it used a lower intensity anyways. So it's kind of like, how helpful is that? And did the study even, could this study achieved more if they did higher intensity? It's a little question mark. So I think for hypertrophy, it's still kind of up in the air. But still a possibility for strength and power.
Okay. Did they say anything about fatigue or like endurance?
I didn't see anything.
Because I feel like this would be great for endurance.
Yeah. I didn't see anything on endurance specific exercise.
Okay.
I'm trying to think off the top of my head, like if they were able to do more reps over time. Mm-hmm. Yeah, I didn't see anything that looked at like true endurance, because I would assume this would help with endurance. And honestly, right. I feel like it would help with the strength endurance. So it'd be interesting to see a study that looked at, as you fatigue, do you maintain your strength longer?
See, that's like when I do this, I'm mostly doing it when, like, in the later stages. Okay. So I know I said earlier that I do, like, earlier stages. I think earlier stages, I just kind of group the exercises together. Yeah. But, like, when I'm trying to target endurance, like, later stages, I kind of do more, like, less rest.
Yeah.
And more grouping of exercises to target that fatigue and work through that fatigue.
For sure. So yeah, now taking it into that kind of practice approach, and like you said, I think it really depends on what your goal is for your rehab and what kind of your supersetting you kind of want to do.
Right.
Like I said, I think it's really great, especially like if you're looking more late stage rehab, like really strength endurance, right? Because you can increase some strength and you can also increase some endurance. So being able to maintain the strength as you start to fatigue, I think is very important. Especially if you go with more of that biomechanically similar style. That's going to be a little bit more intense towards the endurance side of things. So I think that's definitely a good consideration. If you're kind of looking, and of course for strength and power, right? The normal, like we've already presented, like that is going to be just like traditional lifting, just cutting down almost half the time. But if you're looking for something hypertrophy, I mean, it might still be possible. I think you just really have to make sure that you are doing those higher intensities and maintaining higher loads. Again, I feel like as athletic trainers, like going for hypertrophy that necessitates those higher loads, it's really hard for us to do just time-wise. That's almost kind of like you're hoping your strength coaches are doing that if you have access to one.
Right.
But still a possibility if you do have time and you're in that possibility and you are doing a late stage rehab that needs still focus on hypertrophy. I thought what was interesting, some of the studies did kind of differ on, okay, how many reps did they do within the set? Did they go to like failure, muscle failure, or do they just do a normal set range? And going to failure can still help with hypertrophy. There are some studies out there that show that going to volitional failure can actually increase hypertrophy. But again, I don't think you could really compromise the load component.
Right.
You do need a higher load to actually induce hypertrophy. And like I said, right, strength, a great technique for this. I think the really nice thing about this technique is just the time efficient component. And I think the word time efficiency makes any AT happy. Because, I think it's a nice way of, especially, again, if you have someone late stage and you're like, dude, I just don't have enough time to dedicate, like, taking someone over to the weight room because, you have all these other things, right? This might make it a little bit more feasible, right? You're cutting down to 30 minutes-ish. Right, that's not bad. That's a lot easier to find in our time than an hour plus.
Honestly, I think it is just being more intentional with it. Like,
yes.
And here's, I don't know how you guys do your rehab plans, but usually, like, I'll write my exercises out by like what I'm trying to target. And the reason why I do that is because, like, let's say I am targeting a hamstring strain and I'm trying to target, right? I'm trying to do hamstring eccentric. I'm trying to do hamstring concentric. I'm trying to do a glute. I'm trying to do core. I'm trying to maybe some calves. Like, so I'm trying to target all these things, right? And I am going in and I'm writing in my exercise sheet, like hamstring, glute, like whatever. And I target them by group because then I actually work with the athlete and say, hey, like I'm giving you all of these.
Yeah.
But on one day I want you to like pick like 2 hamstring exercises or pick like 1 glute exercise and then pick like 2 core exercises. So then they have a little bit of variety within their rehab plan, but they're still targeting the same group of muscles.
Yeah.
I think if for me, like because I like categorize it that way in my rehab plans, if it is this actually might be easier to target with the supersets, because then I can just be like, oh, do this and then like no rest and when you go into like this next. But I was also thinking something that I do for hamstrings, some manual resistance, just having them prone. Usually I'll start them with an eccentric manual resistance of that hamstring, where they're just prone and just knee extension or knee flexion into knee extension. So I'm resisting and I'll do that. And then no rest, I move into that concentric phase. And the concentric phase is so much harder after that eccentric. But I like to do the eccentric first, especially because muscle recruitment and it's harder, and I like to target that eccentric. Later, I end up doing it when they're more fatigued, like later stages. But I like to start closer to that, and I do superset that one.
Yeah, nice. That's interesting. That's really cool.
And that would be more that biomechanically similar.
Yeah,
one.
for sure. Nice. That's cool.
I feel like most of the ones that I do are biomechanically similar.
I mean, that's pretty cool. You're stressing the muscle, putting it into a very fatigued state.
Right. What are some of your supersets that you've done? Do you have any like go-tos?
See, that's the thing is, I don't think I've ever consciously actually done it. That's why I was interested in reading this, because I do kind of want to start applying it a little bit more. I feel like I would like to do the agonist-antagonist more, but now I'm very intrigued based on what you said about that biomechanically similar kind of way of applying it.
I feel like the reason why I like target this is because of fatigue. I didn't really think of it because of hypertrophy or because of like any of these other things that we talked about. Like it makes sense. But I feel like it's so much easier to think about it as, especially the biomechanically similar ones, the ones that are you're already working that muscle and then you're going to keep working that muscle.
And again, remember with supersetting, it is back-to-back exercises, minimal rest in between those sets, but like there is a rest component, before you start it up again. Right. But yeah, so just keep that in mind, that it is supposed to be stressful like that. It is back-to-back. Like, okay, we go to this exercise. All right, moving to the next. Nope, stop stalling. No conversation. Let's go.
I also like to do the agonist antagonist back to back if I've noticed that they are if they are recruiting. You know, sometimes when you get injured, you recruit the antagonist. I like to do that so that we can kind of fatigue, quote unquote fatigue, right? The whatever antagonist, and then when we move into the opposite, then we can try and get that not to fire.
And I was going to say, there's actually evidence behind that, as far as it increases neural drive to the agonist muscle when that happens.
Nice.
Yeah. So you are increasing that kind of neural drive to actually get the agonist to fire more.
And ideally, that should get the antagonist to not fire.
Yeah, correct.
Ideally. That's kind of like my
perfect world.
Right. I'm trying to think of an example of when I do this. I feel like it's just like I see it and then I'm like, oh, let's just target the opposite muscle. It's hard for me to like sit here and think a perfect example, but
yeah.
Actually, I do pair my calf raises with my tib raises.
Nice.
Like against, like I'll do like calf raises. Like usually I'll do like sets of 15 because like that's pretty
for sure
tiring, and then I'll get them back against the wall and then do tib raises like straight into those. But other than that, like off the top of my head, it's hard for me to think of a perfect example.
Yeah. Yeah, I can't think of actually consciously programming it this way.
Sorry. Hip flexors. Hip flexors are so tricky sometimes. I feel like the hip flexor glute, like that hip flexion glute or hip extension pairing, I feel like that's a really good pairing too.
Yeah. Yeah, for sure. Yeah.
Okay, you were going to say, sorry.
No, I was just thinking, I just don't consciously think that I've meant to do that. I feel like I've done it. That's
what I think is, like, when you were talking about this, like, I really think that this is something that we do in rehab. I think that we have so much power with knowledge to make this more intentional.
Yeah.
Because it is super beneficial.
It is. Even just from a time efficiency component.
Right.
Right. You can cut down time, which, again, most ATs wish they had more of. Right. So being able to actually have something that can achieve the same goals as just lifting is very beneficial.
Mm-hmm. What is your action item for this?
I would say supersetting is very similar to traditional lifting as outcomes. So I think it's something that you can feel pretty confident to try and implement into your practice.
How?
By programming an exercise after an exercise with minimal to no rest. Being a little more intentional about how you organize it. And then just really knowing what your goal is for that rehab. I mean, we already do a pretty good job of coming up with our goals for rehab. Mm-hmm. So I think that might be an easy transition to be able to like, oh, well, I want this to be a more fatiguing day, and I'm going to use this technique to do so.
Mm-hmm. Honestly, I think this will also help with setting the intention and setting up a little bit better of a rehab program because and I see this like when athletes come from, some other places or even clinics that they go see other clinicians. Sometimes they're just given really basic exercises that don't challenge them. I feel like this can also add a level of challenge.
For sure.
That even with the same exercises, I think can target a little bit different different intention and really get us a little bit closer to our goal of getting them back.
For sure. Mm-hmm.
So with that, again, if you're interested in this CEU, go ahead and scroll down to the show notes. All of the instructions are on the website, but you can also find them on our Instagram at AT Corner Podcast. We have a little reel that's pinned to the top of our page that gives you a little tutorial. If you guys are interested in other CEUs, we also work with MedBridge, and you can use code ATCorner for $101 off your subscription because it is a reporting year. And if you buy it now, it's actually good for, I think it's good for a year. So that would mean that you can already you can finish out your CEUs for this year, and you'll already get a head start on next year if you start doing them in 2026 or next reporting cycle, I guess. Yep. So that would be a super bonus. Make sure you scroll down the show notes. There's a link for that, or you could just use the code ATCorner. If you guys are new, we do every episode as either education, interviews, or story episodes. Story episodes are where we take stories from real life athletic trainers on various topics, and we highlight them and we talk about our practice. So other than that, I think that's all I got.
Thank you for helping us showcase athletic training behind the tape. Bye.